In this world just flooded with information, it can be really tough trying to get clear on complex topics, especially something like autism. So today we're doing a deep dive into an article that honestly offers some crucial perspective. We're unpacking a recent study that really got people talking.
That's right. It was a study in Nature Genetics, and Scientific American picked it up with this headline that sounded really definitive. But the article we're focusing on, the aspiration of subtypes, whose autism gets sequenced by Dr. Jaime Hoerricks, well, it takes a much, much deeper look. It goes way beyond that surface level take.
Exactly. And that's the key thing we want to explore with you today. We're not just, summarizing. We're digging into the nuances, the kind of aha moments, and the really big questions this analysis raises, helping you get a real handle on what's actually going on here.
Hmm.
Okay, so let's start right there with that headline that grabbed all the attention, because that's really where Dr. Hoerricks kicks off their critique. Scientific American put it out there. Researchers identify 4 autism subtypes with distinct genes and traits. Sounds super neat, right? Almost like, finally, a clear answer. People often want that kind of clarity with autism.
Yeah.
4 distinct types, all linked back to genes. Simple.
Yeah, but the source article jumps on that immediately. It argues that this clarity, well, it's more of a rhetorical device. I mean, sure, the Nature Genetics study itself is complex, it's rigorous in its methods. It uses this thing called person-centered mixture modeling on a big group of people, but its major, major limitations kind of buried. You don't see it in the headline, and it only gets a quick mention way down in the study itself.
And this is where Dr. Hoerricks really flips the script. The detail they pull out is pretty stark. They state, nearly all the genes being sequenced and all the autistic traits being clustered belong to white children of European ancestry.
Wow.
Yeah, and they're blunt about it. This is not a small oversight. It is foundational.
Foundational. That's a strong word. And the source goes on to argue the headline isn't just like getting ahead of itself, it's aspirational. And that aspiration isn't harmless. It takes something really complex, something tied up in culture and personal experience, and tries to flatten it, giving it this veneer of genomic authority, which leads straight to the question the source poses, but progress for whom?
Right. Progress for whom? Let's unpack that. Dr. Hoerricks then lays out exactly who was in this study and who wasn't. They point out the cohort, which came from the Spark database, mirrors these long-standing gender, racial, and socioeconomic exclusions you often see in autism research.
Yeah, the specifics are pretty telling. The source notes that the polygenic score analyses those complex genetic calculations. They were only done on the kids of European ancestry. Why? Because of reference dataset constraints. Basically, the data they had to compare against was mostly from white people.
Okay.
And the tools they use, the SCQ, RBSR, CBCL questionnaires, they're normed on white Western populations, and they rely on what caregivers report. Plus, and this is critical, the source points out that kids whose communication is really different, maybe more gestural, relational, things that don't fit neatly into questionnaires, they're unlikely to even appear in this kind of research.
So the study explicitly mentions the percentage.
It does, 77% white. And the source connects the dots. The reference databases are full of white genomes because whiteness was always centered as the default human substrate in the genomic sciences.
Okay, so we see the skew. But the source asks, why is this so important? What are the real-world consequences of this imbalance?
Well, the consequences are huge, according to the author. Autistic people of color often get missed, or worse, misdiagnosed. They might be labeled with things like oppositional defiance or mood disorders, maybe even psychosis, because their ways of being don't fit those white, middle-class, English-speaking norm that underpin the diagnostic criteria.
So they miss out on support.
Exactly. They get excluded from services or even punished instead of understood. So the source argues, when researchers identify subtypes using data almost entirely from white kids, they're not actually describing autism in its full diversity. They're describing what whiteness sees when it looks at autism.
Wow.
Yeah. Dr. Hoerricks puts it plainly, these are not subtypes. They are artifacts of racialized methodology.
Artifacts of methodology. That's quite a statement. It leads directly to another powerful line from the source. Let's say it plainly. This study wasn't done for us. Can you unpack who the author means by us there? And if it wasn't for autistic people, what was the study's purpose, according to this critique?
Right. The us clearly refers to autistic people themselves, particularly those outside the dominant demographic group studied. And the source argues the study's real goal wasn't about helping individuals understand themselves better or getting support faster or improving that support or even easing the burden of proving need. No. It was fundamentally about categorization, about classification, about making autistic people sortable, legible through the lens of genetics, mainly for institutions.
Right, making them legible for institutions. That really challenges the idea of neutral science, doesn't it? So why do institutions value this kind of categorization so much, based on the source?
Well, the author suggests institutions thrive on order, prediction, control. Simple as that, really. These kinds of studies, the argument goes, feed into a clinical system that tends to view autistic people as, well, problems to be identified, labeled, and ultimately managed or controlled.
It's really interesting, then, that the original study used the phrase person-centered models. How does Dr. Hoerricks' article reframe that specific language?
Oh, sharply. The source reframes it as data-centered, not autistic-centered. It points out that, yeah, the study talks about traits, but it completely misses things like diverse communication styles or relational ways of being. It just slices the spectrum into these neat boxes without ever asking autistic people, hey, does this actually make sense to you? Does this reflect your life?
So if the study wasn't primarily for autistic people, according to this critique, then who does benefit from the strive to classify? Who gains?
Dr. Hoerricks is very direct about this. They name academics, grant writers, bioethicists with tenure, pharmaceutical interests, and autism thought leaders who speak for us without ever speaking with us. The argument is that these subtypes are useful institutionally. They can be funded, they can potentially be patented, they can be sorted by algorithms and, sold back to insurance companies disguised as personalized care. The source calls this precision containment, not precision care.
Precision containment. That's a chilling phrase. The critique goes even deeper, questioning what is actually being measured when they talk about autistic traits. Dr. Hoerricks describes them as moral complaints of a culture obsessed with control. How do they unpack that idea?
It's a really provocative framing. The source suggests that what often gets labeled as an autistic trait is actually just a failure to conform to capitalist expectations. Things like, not making eye contact when expected, not speaking on cue, finding it hard to sit still, or not hitting developmental milestones on a schedule that fits neatly with factory bells or school timetables.
Right.
And because so much data comes from caregiver reports, the source asks a really crucial question. Whose frustrations are being recorded and for whose benefit? Is it about the child experience or the observer's expectations?
And what about the tools themselves? Those questionnaires, SEQ, RBSR, CBCL. What's the author's perspective on what they actually do?
The source has a very strong take here. They argue these aren't really tools for understanding autistic experience and its richness. They're more like tools for surveillance. The core criticism is that they just miss so much. They miss our relationships to rhythm, our sensory architectures, our fluid perception of time, our capacity to build meaning through metaphor, through silence, through sound that does not come when summoned. All the stuff that makes autistic life what it is.
It's fascinating how Dr. Hoerricks reframes the study's own abstract. They say the study seeks to unravel and reduce it, to impose structure where there may be none, and extract genetic answers from a population that did not ask to be studied.
Yeah, and the author brings in other frameworks to analyze this, like the power-threat meaning framework and also a decolonial perspective. So while the researchers might see exciting progress in finding genetic patterns that align with behavioral categories, the source sees something different. They see systems identifying threats, things like non-compliance, and then looking for biological causes that can be managed or controlled. The source argues, this is not a study that asks what autistic children mean by their actions. It asks instead, how can we decode them from the outside? And that process, extracting data, creating categories based on external norms, and calling it truth that, the source says, is colonial science.
Colonial science. Wow. Okay, so connecting back to the reporting, Dr. Hoerricks calls the way this study was presented to the public, aspiration passed off as truth. What's the danger in that, according to the source?
The danger, the author argues, is that when this aspiration erases all the crucial context, like the sample bias we discussed, it's not the researchers or the journalists who face the consequences. It's autistic people. Their lives, their identities, their access to support can be reshaped by these simplified, often misleading narratives. As the source puts it, aspiration without accountability is not hope, it's overreach. And when it lands in a world already hostile to autistic difference, it's not neutral, it's harm.
That really underscores the importance of that principle. Nothing about us without us. How does the source see that principle applying or not applying here?
It's central to the critique. Dr. Hoerricks states very clearly that the principle was just absent. Nowhere in the study, nor in its coverage, is the principle of nothing about us without us honored. Not in who was studied, not in how it was framed, not even in the aspirations driving it.
Mm.
And they point out that these new subtypes, unlike maybe diagnostic levels, which at least claim to guide support, don't even pretend to do that. They're just for sorting, not to figure out need, but to create distance. It's described as the datification of difference imposed through systems we never consented to.
And the source connects this to trust, right? Making a point about who actually volunteers genetic data for these kinds of studies.
Yes, a really crucial observation. The author suggests it's mostly people who believe the system, the research system, the medical system, is fundamentally theirs, designed to help and protect them. People who feel perhaps unconsciously insulated enough by race, class, and social capital to trust these institutions with sensitive data.
Which implies many others don't feel that trust.
Exactly. The source talks about a profound trust gap, pointing out that many Black, Indigenous, Latin, and immigrant families have learned, often through painful history, that when the state asks for information, it is rarely to offer help. It is to mark, to track, to decide. So for these communities, being cautious isn't ignorance, it's wisdom earned the hard way.
Given this incredibly deep critique of the methodology, the purpose, the ethics, what response does Dr. Hoerricks advocate for? What's the takeaway for the autistic community from this perspective?
The response articulated is one of clear refusal, actually. Dr. Hoerricks says, I refuse inclusion on those terms. This isn't science, it's enclosure. There's no desire expressed to be sequenced or have their inner life categorized like this. The call is instead to be left alone by these institutions, to build our own frameworks of understanding rooted in solidarity, in lived knowledge, in the messy beauty of autistic kinship and collective care. It's about community-defined understanding.
And the author explicitly pushes back against the whole idea of subtypes as being relevant to lived experience.
Absolutely. They state quite plainly, autistic people don't think in subtypes. We don't walk around parsing ourselves into genetic clusters, The focus is different. We are trying to survive, to build community, to make meaning, not to fit into predefined boxes.
So what's the final call to action then from the source?
It's a call for resistance and self-definition within the autistic community. We resist, we write, we remember that our lives were never problems to be solved. It emphasizes strengthening networks of mutual care, refusing inclusion on terms that erase us, and crucially, responding when external narratives try to define autism. Responding in all our multiplicity, in all our messiness, in all our unquantifiable humanity, not just by asking who is missing from the picture, but by making our own, creating their own narratives.
So summing up this deep dive, we've really traced this tension, haven't we? Between this scientific drive for neat classifications and the actual, complex, lived reality of autism, especially for those often pushed to the margins.
Definitely. And the source leaves us with this powerful caution. We need to look really closely at what gets labeled science or progress, scrutinize the aspirations behind it. Because, as Dr. Hoerricks warns, when power masks itself as science, when threat is renamed trait, and when meaning is discarded in favor of measurement, then what we are left with is not understanding. It is surveillance, it is taxonomy, and it is harm.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a really important question to think about. If history shows that mapping and categorizing people has often been about control, not care, especially for marginalized groups, what's our responsibility when we see headlines claiming breakthroughs or simple answers for complex human experiences?
Sure.
How do we push for knowledge that truly serves all of humanity in its messy, diverse, unquantifiable reality?